In part 1 of this review we saw the unboxing of the model, we had a look through the instruction manual, and amongst other things we reeved up the A-frame of the crane. And so in part 1 the model was ready for the road. In part 2 we will continue the assembly and look at a number of configurations, and also the details and features. To start with, we have a chore, which is to remove all of the bolts from the moulding sprues, and you can spend a long time with this happy task. When you've done it, it's good to bag them up and identify them. The first configuration to look at is the crane in an on-site move, and we start that by fitting the crane to the carrier. And here you can see that a giant hand crane clips it into place. With that done, we can unwind the A-frame and bring it round to the front of the crane. And here we're going to add the main boom foot, although in the video it was probably the backmast foot, but we always like to go large. We've had to improvise a connection from the A-frame to the boom foot, and that gives us an acceptable looking result. Then we add the extension box at the back, and this is one of those places where the pins recommended in the manual are just not a good fit. We hang on the two side counterweight trays, and then we add on the extension for the floating counterweight tray. And this is an area where the suggested pins are too loose. We add on some handrails and then we need to prop it up like in the video. And we're using some black blocks. We need to add on one of the walkways, but we have to take the front handrails off to fit under the boom foot. And this all clips onto the crane in a fairly loose way. After that, we've only got one more thing to do, and that is to lower the work platforms on either side of the turntable. And these are plastic parts which just unclip. For the next configuration we'll go for a simple main boom. So we'll start by setting the crane up on site. Those outrigger beams are massive and they're stiff to pull out. And they're also telescopic. The pistons get lowered in the usual way, and the end gets located into a pad. Also provided with the model is a set of very large spreader plates, and there's no problem at all posing the model wheels free. Let's stack up some standard counterweight, and we'll fit a lifting head to the boom top, and this is another area where the pins are too loose. We've picked out some sections to build the boom, and here it is as if it's just been lifted off the ground. And here it is rigged with a hook block. Next we'll add a derrick mast to that configuration, and we'll go big with a double height one. All the boom parts are joined with Conrad's favoured plastic bolts, and sometimes they go in quick and easy, other times you have to force them in, and sometimes getting them out can be a painful job. And it's a pity the model didn't have a higher quality, more modern bolting system. The same can be said of the pendant bars, which are plastic. They work, but they're not particularly realistic looking. But the one advantage with the plastic bolts here is that they are quick to assemble. And it's not always easy to work out the overall best pendant length for a non-standard configuration. Next is a typical wind turbine configuration, and this has the double width mast sections. And as in real life, these have to be built up from transportable width sections. For the model, we start by installing some plastic internal bracing, and these are more for show than any real structural purpose. And with a little effort you can install them in the preformed holes and get them to look reasonably straight. Once we have the two halves fabricated, we can fit them together. And as you can see here, they join up in what is the middle of the completed section. On one side they're clipped together using these white tie bars, and the fit is anything from very good to a bit loose. On the opposite side the joint is made by fitting plastic bolts, and the last thing to fit is some mesh walkways. These just slightly clip into place, but the consequence is they're easily dislodged. Here we're using two of the big sections, although there are 3 available in the box, and they fit to transition pieces in the usual way, and here's the overall length. The final configuration we'll build is the luffing flyjib. There are some other possibilities out of the box, and one is this huge hook block. It is for the heaviest lifts and it's fully modular, so we'll strip down into 2 separate blocks if you want, and there are removable side cheeks. Also included in the box is another variation of the lifting head, and again this one is typical for use on wind turbine sites. Looking underneath the carrier, and the detail is at a basic level. And that's understandable considering the first version of this model appeared some 16 years ago. The driving cab has nice Mammoet graphics and a realistic number plate. There are plastic unsilvered mirrors and beacon lights on top. And there are some simple steps leading up into the cab. The cab doors have decent looking window seals, and there's detailing within the casting of the outrigger beams. The applied graphics are very sharp. The wheel design is the same on each axle, but it's always nice to see some branding on the sidewalls of the tyres. There are some nice tiny graphics applied, and these continue through towards the back. At the rear there's a simple fire extinguisher and some steps and metal handrails, and there are also beacon lights and a number plate. With the outriggers out you can see the pistons that push them, and they have simple plastic jackets. At the end of the outrigger beam there's nice chevron graphics, and the piston faces are smooth. The pad is a plastic part and the plates are metal. The carrier deck has a textured surface, and the crane cab is well decorated with traffic light signals at the top, and good looking windows with the Mammoet name underneath. Under the boom foot you can see the 3 large slewing motors, and there's also an auxiliary winch which would be good with some rope on it. The walkway platforms are metal with textured surfaces. Moving down the crane body there's the nice red and black Mammoet decoration, and some sharp looking graphics. The winch drums are all in grey plastic, and maybe black would have looked better, and there's a textured cover over the engine. The counterweight blocks have chevron markers and usable lifting points, and the red A-frame gear is plastic with metal sheaves. The main boom foot is a massive piece with Liebherr signs, and metal handrails can be fitted. There are also mesh walkways both top and bottom. The pendant bars are of consistent length, so there is a reasonable tension in both, and all the boom sections have clip-on metal walkways. Here is the intermediate hook block, and it's a large piece with metal sheaves and an impressively large metal hook. The boom sections have black ends, and these look like they're formed by being fully red and then dipped in black paint, but the quality is variable and it rubs off a bit too easily. The structure for the counterweight tray is pretty much all metal, and it's all robustly made. At the back there are twin ladders, and they are also in metal, and as shown here the tray is not fully loaded. The top of the derrick mast has some plastic parts, but one thing lacking is a proper tying off point. The new wide mast sections look very good with their mesh walkways, and the complicated structure is modelled well. Like other boom sections, there are also ladders. Here's one of the intermediate struts, and it's an all-metal lattice part, and it's well made. There are similar parts for the new short jib at the boom head, and the pendant cables are of a fixed length, so it's not intended to leave out the middle section on the jib. The special hook block for this jib is an all-metal part. At the jib head there are metal sheaves, and a very small single-line hook is included. Here we're now taking a look at the luffing jib equipment, and it's modelled very well, but again it does lack a proper tying off point for the luffing rope. And it's a similar story with the large heavy lift head. It is all metal, but again it lacks a proper tying off point for the hoist rope. We're back underneath the crane carrier, and each axle has independent steering, and you can achieve good workable angles. There's not really suspension, but some axles pivot a bit. Out on the cranes etc. superhighway the model rolls very well, and you can also get a very good steering angle, and that slightly weird looking crab steering. The crane cab has the ability to tilt somewhat, and a new feature on this version of the model is the access stairway, and that can be raised up when the crane is working, and as long as you're fairly careful you can straighten it out, and it reaches down to make a good looking access ladder. If you want to be a crane driver and you have the patience to work the winch, then you can perform some realistic heavy lifting. And in some configurations you have to turn 2 winch drums at the same time. This is a huge and heavy model, but as long as you act suitably and smoothly, you can get it to rotate nicely. And if you want to go for a maximum lifting capacity, you can extend out the radius of the counterweight tray.
Time for a dim check.
So we've built the windmill configuration in a size that fits a normal room, and it comes in at around 88 inches or 223 centimetres, but there's enough parts in the box to almost make it twice as high. This is a hugely impressive model from Conrad of the Liebherr LG 1750 SX3 in Mammoet colours. The biggest plus point by far is all the many configurations that it is possible to build with the model, but in some other respects such as detailing, it does reflect that it first came out as a model some 16 years ago. If you want a really impressive huge crane model, it is very good.